Everything in my life that was going wrong was actually my fault. My father passed away suddenly, and that was the biggest turning point in my life. I was stuck in this sort of victim cycle. I ended up in a lot of financial debt.
How can someone begin to hold themselves through that process so they can take those steps into more of an aligned life without just creating internal chaos?
We actually cannot change from a dysregulated state. We can't rely on the outside world to make us feel safe. If we're in the survival state, there is no transformation that's really possible.
Who is the nervous system work for, breath work? Who could benefit from it? In today's episode, I'm traveling here in Cape Town in South Africa. The guest we have on today, Olivia Moon, she's a breathwork facilitator. She trains other breathwork facilitators, and she has her own personal journey of what life was like before she learned these practices, how she then transitioned and integrated these practices into her life. There's actually a specific part of the episode where Olivia guides through a short breathwork practice, which is a gift that you can give yourself today, partway through. So listen in and let this code activate something deep within. Enjoy.
Thanks for having me on, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Yeah, over here in Cape Town, it's a beautiful place, and I just want to acknowledge you and appreciate the fact that you've taken the time out of your day to share your wisdom with the world.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Awesome. So I think a great place for us to start with with alignment, with the nervous system, with your practices, is who is the nervous system work for, breath work? Who is it for? Like, who could benefit from this?
Yeah. So what's quite fascinating is that nervous system regulation and this world of somatics has actually become quite a buzzword and quite a popularized now in the mainstream, which is such a good thing. But it's quite interesting because it's actually the oldest system in the body. It's the most recent evolution of the nervous system was 35,000 years ago. So we have this ancient system, this operating system within us that's actually running the show. And so it's always been there. And so what the difference is now is that it's starting to become, we're becoming more aware of it. And we are mostly becoming aware of what a massive influence it has on our life. And so really, when you dive into it, the autonomic nervous system is dictating what we think, what we feel, what we do, and what we don't do. And so whereas a lot of the previous sort of personal development space was all around mindset, what we've started to learn is that the body is so much more powerful than the conscious mind alone. And actually, the body is the subconscious mind. All of the subconscious material and unconscious patterning, it's all held in the body. It's not held in the brain. And so all of the more traditional approaches to self-development have been about thinking positively or taking positive steps through using your willpower to be a better person. But ultimately, the nervous system, unless it is coming from a place of internal resource safety, it's going to continuously bring us into a space of self-sabotage. So when you say whose nervous system work for, it's literally for anyone. If you have a body, then the nervous system is playing a role in your life. And so it's either going to be operating unconsciously, or we are going to start bringing conscious awareness to it and start working with it in these intentional ways, which honestly creates a massive shift in every area of your life. And this is really what I find to be so exciting and so empowering about the nervous system, is that when we start to learn how to work with it and start to come into a baseline of regulation, it actually changes the way we see the world. We start to move from living from a survival place, the survival self is what I call it, which is also the realm of the ego, into living as our most authentic self. And this really is, when we speak about this word alignment, it's about how do we align with our authentic self, with the soul self, if you will, that we are, which is essentially following this pathway to our greatest fulfillment, this unique path that we all have that's different to each other, rather than operating from the realm of the ego, which is operating on shoulds. What should we be doing, and what are other people expecting from us? And so this is really where we start to come into a felt sense of alignment. And that, to me, what it's really about.
That's so beautifully put. And yeah, what an exciting chapter, what an exciting journey that we're on as a collective consciousness with these deeper realizations of these systems that have been, inside of us forever. And that now we're bringing more awareness to that. And yeah, realizing that actually it's a lot around the bottom up rather than just the top down.
100%.
Yeah, what was your journey like before you came into this work
Mm.
and before you transitioned into what you're doing now? Because I think it'll really help the listener like understand and to be able to realize what life was like before, and then we can go into the modalities and what life is like for you now.
Yeah, there's this beautiful Carl Jung quote that says, "Until we bring the unconscious to the conscious, it will control our lives and we'll call it fate." And that kind of sums up where I used to be in my life. And I'm not really sure where things kind of started to get a bit wobbly, but I know that I'm not the only one that's really lived a lot of their life operating from this program of not good enough. And this not good enough program, it can show up in so many different ways. So until we understand that it's actually this root belief of I'm not good enough, that we can start to see why we do certain things. And so for me, this not good enough program was creating a response that made me want to prove myself, prove my worth. And so it was the sense of needing to look a certain way, needing to achieve a certain level of success, needing to go on specific kinds of holidays, or needing to have a relationship that looked a certain way. And so there was this kind of striving that was happening, but there was also such a deep pattern of self-sabotage. I actually used to say that if I ever wrote a book, it would be The Art of Self-Sabotage, because, what ended up happening is that even if I called in something like a healthy relationship, because I didn't feel good enough, I didn't feel actually deserving of it, I would actually somehow unconsciously sabotage it. And so, yeah, I was in a very different space, and it, in some ways, not very long ago. And I would say that I've always had this deep sense of a connection to the universe, if you will, but it was also clouded out by some really unhealthy patterns and ways of being. And what I really realized I was doing was kind of unconsciously, once again, trying to prove myself, which looked like climbing this corporate ladder or thinking I needed to achieve a certain level of success. But the thing is that I wasn't really following my heart. I was following what I thought I should be doing and what made kind of sense at the time. So I ended up in a realm of corporate hospitality, which wasn't completely off in some ways, but in other ways, I was really feeling empty inside. And probably the biggest thing that was running the show back then was a very difficult relationship with my self-worth, and really self-love was at the heart of it. And this concept of self-love was kind of a bit foreign to me. And I kind of thought, ultimately I was operating from the sense of conditional self-love. Like if I look good one day, then I'd be like, okay, I'm good enough. And then if I look not as good the other day, I'd be like, oh, no, I'm not good enough. And I really battled for years, and actually since high school, with disordered eating. And so disordered eating is an interesting one because it's kind of not far along the spectrum enough to be considered an eating disorder. So you sort of think it's just something you need to live with. But for me, that looked like extreme restriction and extreme binging. And so it was this binge restrict cycle, which actually just brought such shame into my life. So what had end up happening is that I would be so desperately trying to control my food intake, which I think was a sense of trying to have a sense of general control of my life. And so I'd be restrictive. I'd be also what I could probably term now as orthorexic, really obsessed with everything needs to be a certain way, health-wise. I've been in many phases of my life of being, thinking I need to be gluten-free, I need to be this, I need to be that, all these different labels that I was attaching to. But then, I'd be so good and restrictive during the week, but all I was doing was thinking about food. And then I would find myself on a Friday evening just completely binging and eating the contents of my fridge, and then feeling so ashamed, and the shame would almost cause me to keep eating. So it was a really, really toxic cycle of this sense of almost eating my feelings, but then the feelings that I was getting from eating were causing me to want to eat more. And then, of course, it will all start again on Monday. Okay, I'm going to start fresh on Monday. So this pattern of what I know now was actually a symptom rather than a cause itself. And so that was, I could really go on as I used to think that I was just very unlucky in many areas of my life. I used to think, I held a belief now that I can recognize it was a limiting belief of, I'm bad with money. I'm just not that lucky. Like things don't really work out for me. And it was often the sense of other people can have that, but not me. There was always this sort of sense of other people's things do seem to work out for other people, but for me, it never really works out as I wanted to. And so I really was stuck in this sort of victim cycle of thinking that life was happening to me. And it got to this place that I ended up in a lot of financial debt. And that was from spending money that I didn't have to try and keep up with this kind of idea about who I needed to be, which included, as one of my lowest moments, was booking a trip to Ibiza on my credit card, which I don't recommend to anybody. But that was just a sense of how disconnected I was with a set of what was really good for me, and the opposite of self-loving, and just wanting to chase the sense of, I was going there to be with some friends that were there and thinking, okay, well, if they're doing it, then I need to be doing it too. But of course they weren't, putting it on credit. And then that brought me into a lot of debt. I had just been broken up with again. It was always the same pattern of falling for someone and feeling really excited by it, and then out of nowhere it would kind of end, and I would think, then it would just kind of reinforce this belief of, okay, well, I'm just not good enough. And I was just not I didn't have a good relationship with alcohol. There was just too much of that on the weekends. During the week I was completely all health conscious, and then on the weekend I would overdo it. And so I was just getting stuck in the same pattern of these same cycles. And then, of course, there was the food stuff, and it was all kind of interconnected. Whereas I'd be in such a terrible place, and then I would reach for food, and then I'd feel worse, and then or it would be from being hungover, then I'd reach for food, and then I'd blame the alcohol, and it was just this not in a good space. And it really was this sense of every Monday I'd try and start again, and then by the weekend it was just not a good pattern that served me. And through this all, interestingly, I was also exploring meditation. I was exploring, all these different kinds of practices, but somehow I kept on self-sabotaging. And it got to this point that I realized I needed to do something drastic. And so that's when in 2019, I booked my first 10-day silent retreat, which was called Vipassana, which some of your listeners might know of, which is it's probably the furthest thing from a retreat in many ways. It's more like a meditation boot camp in that you meditate for 10 hours a day. And so it's of course, in complete silence, and it's this beautiful retreat center. They have them all over the world, actually. And so I went to this place, and in the build up to it, I started to really, do a lot more of the inner work, started to realize the things that weren't serving me. But it was really being there and being alone with my own mind for 10 days. That was really quite incredible. And what ended up happening, as hard as it was, is that I received the insight that I was actually responsible for all of my own suffering, and that everything in my life that was going wrong was actually my fault. And that wasn't actually a bad thing to learn. It was the most empowering thing, because I also realized that I was the one creating my suffering, which meant therefore I was responsible for my own healing as well. And so that retreat really put me onto a different path. And it was actually the first time, which was it felt very out of reach at the time, that I felt like there's something in me that really wants to help people. And I actually want to really share some of the things that I've learned, even though I'd only, just sort of really learned them. And it was this sense of, I would love to share this one day. And I remember seeing the person sitting and holding the meditation and just having the sense of, wow, I'd love that, one day. And at the time, once again, because I was still in my corporate job, I was still in all this debt, it felt so out of reach. But through that, and during that time, I think I started it just before the retreat as well. I started exploring, because actually it came from the sense of, how do I get out of this debt? What can I do? Because I've got my day job, I can't quit it, because, and it was well paid enough, but, I couldn't really get myself out of the hole. And so it was this, because I love podcasts, I'd listened to this podcast and I realized, you can actually start blogging. And so that was actually such a big decision to sort of listen to that, because I've always loved writing. So I thought, this is actually a good thing. I thought, okay, what am I going to blog about? And then I started to really unpack, like, what do I care about? Like, what am I Googling when I'm not working? And that's actually a question I love to ask my clients. Like, what do you Google when you're not working? Because it can often show that, what is your soul calling to learn more about?
Yeah.
And I realized it was actually all these different things. At the time it was understanding how your beliefs create your reality, understanding, meditation, understanding even things like smudging, all these different things that were so fascinating to me. And and then I realized that the root of it was about self-love. And so the blog, which was a curious exploration of self-love, and at the time I didn't really get what that even meant. But now the way that I understand self-love is so different. So that sort of started the 10-day silent retreat started things off into a different path. And then, interestingly, a month after that, my father passed away suddenly. And that was the biggest turning point in my life, where my heart literally broke open. And for the first time, I experienced what I would call God in everything. And it was like this really profound, in the grief, there was just this something that awakened, and it was almost like my heart had been so closed. And even though I was doing all the modalities and all the things, like I wasn't living from my heart, I was living from my head. And that experience of grief dropped me into my heart space. And from there, everything in my life began to change.
It's beautiful. And I felt that. Yeah. And thank you for sharing. And it's so relatable, what you're sharing there, especially when it comes to these patterns that play out. And sometimes at the time it can be so confusing, right? With things like eating and emotional eating, or any of these patterns which we can identify as, hey, this is unhealthy, and then at the time it can be confusing where they're coming from. Throughout this process, if someone's listening in and they're relating to what you're sharing in these in these different areas, like, where do these patterns begin, and how can someone begin to start identifying them like you have?
Yeah, and it's a very, very deep and never-ending, I almost want to say, process, as these beliefs essentially shape our reality. And the work that I've done and the studying I've done, it's so incredible just how much there is to this. But essentially, when we are born, and this kind of comes back to the nervous system, we are kind of like, in many ways, a blank slate. So for our survival, we are tribal creatures. So we were born into tribes. And in our tribe, it was for our best interest for us as a child to fit in with the tribe. So it's for our survival. As you can imagine, a human baby is literally the most helpless creature on the planet, like more than any other animal or organism. And so it needs someone to care for it. Otherwise, it won't survive. So because of that, there's this period of time that happens after we're born that we are continuously still, our brain is still, and our nervous system is shaping for years and years to come. So the most powerful time is between 0 and 7 years old. And so in that time, your little human body, and through our 5 senses, but also through the sense of neuroception, being able to sense through our nervous system, we're able to pick up in our environment, what are the beliefs? How are people interacting with each other? And essentially, who do I need to be in order to be loved? And who do I need in order to be safe? And so that is going to be adapted and shaped according to the environment that we are in. And so a lot of the time, if we've experienced any sense of a parent not being completely present with us, we will immediately make meaning out of that, which of course is not the true meaning, but it's our perceived meaning. For example, if a parent comes into the room and leaves, we might feel, and doesn't come back when we cry, we might feel a sense of abandonment. And so we might feel like abandonment is a real threat. And so that's something that we then carry with us, and it starts to then become programmed in. And the interesting thing about these programs, so some of them, for example, are that worthiness wound. So if a caregiver changes their expression after we've done something, or we feel in some way not like we haven't done what we're supposed to do, that I'm not good enough, or that sense of there's something wrong with me can start to program in. And so with these beliefs, it's not necessarily a one-time thing, but with repetition, it starts to become almost ingrained in your into neural pathways. So if we're having these kinds of experiences continuously where our needs are not being met, we're going to adapt in a certain way. So an example would be, if we're a baby and we cry and we cry and we cry and no one comes, and so then we cry louder and then someone comes, that's probably going to show our own system that, okay, we need to make a really big noise in order for us to actually be heard. So that will often be people who end up then playing the victim, or they start, exaggerating their stories, or they feel like they need to take up a lot more space than maybe they actually want to be. And so that there's many ways it can adapt. But then if you had a baby that cries and cries and cries and no one comes, and they cry and cry and cry more and still no one comes, then what they end up doing is realizing, okay, well, no one's coming for me, so I need to just shut down. So that will often bring about a sense of avoidant tendencies. So I'm not going to express how I feel because it's actually not safe to express how I feel, because people withdraw. So it could also be, for example, I cry and cry and cry, no one comes. And then when I'm not crying, then someone comes. So it's like, okay, now I need to always be pleasant. I need to be pleasing people. And when I do nice things, then people give me love. So this is the interesting thing, is that even though our parents mostly, I mean, that might be a big generalization, but most of our parents did the best they could. And on some level, and I would say almost on the soul level, love us unconditionally. But that love doesn't show up as unconditional. It's very much conditional. So when you're a good child, you receive praise and love. And when you are naughty, or you show anger, or you don't agree, then you are punished, and with love is withdrawn. So that is how we're forming these beliefs that we're carrying into our system. And so a lot of it is pre-verbal. It's actually, once again, it's this programmed in. So it's not about, we can't talk ourselves out of it. So this idea around, if you had to say an affirmation like, I am worthy of love, I am worthy of love, but you have a program in that shows that I'm not good enough, and actually I don't deserve good things because good things never happen to me, then it's going to not land. It's our conscious mind is only 5% of our mind, and our mind is not just our brain, it's our whole body, it's our whole nervous system. 95% versus 5%. So you can't, if you're trying to work on mindset work alone, it's going to be a lot more difficult. But when you start to bring in the body, then you start to actually open up this opportunity of, okay, I feel safe, and therefore I'm able to explore doing things differently. And so when it comes to, the original question, it's a process of, there's so many different ways that we can start to do the work. And ultimately it can sometimes just start with self-inquiry. It can be asking ourselves, what is the story that I'm telling myself right now that's creating this feeling? Or what is the story right now what am I believing to be true? So curiosity is always going to be the pathway in. Right. And starting to ask ourselves questions. I always think about it, if you imagine a neural pathway as like a road, and the road most traveled is going to be the easiest, right? So you're going to keep traveling down that road, and you're going to keep repeating the same patterns. But if you imagine you're walking on that road, but then someone stops and asks you for directions, you have to pause, and you have to actually go, okay, well, where am I going? Where does this lead to? So in that way, the more we can start to bring in that pattern interrupt, which could be a question, or it could be even better, a breath, taking a deep breath. We stop allowing those neural pathways to be so powerful, and we start to create choice. And so once we have choice, and we can actually choose the way we respond rather than respond out of unconscious programming or patterning, then our reality starts to change. And really that is the process of transformation. We start to make new choices, which create new results.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Such powerful shares. I mean, what's coming up for me there is when you were sharing about the early, childhood experiences, which we all have. What was coming up for me is, like when you get a memory stick that you plug into a computer, It's almost like these first like 7 years that we get this memory stick that's put in, and like every experience that we have is just downloaded onto that. Like, and not just like the experience that we have, but also the people who are around, like what's going on for them internally, and like their nervous system almost like just transfers onto this memory stick. We then have this memory stick, which we're left with as an adult, with all of these programs which are just stored in the body, that at some point, sounds like what you've been conscious enough and wise enough to do. And the same for myself. And I'm sure for a lot of the listeners in this, is almost like we're plugging this memory stick in and we're like, oh, wow. Look at this program here. Yeah. And some of it you're like, oh, this is really helpful.
Yeah.
And then others you're like, oh, now like we need to change that. So then there's this curiosity piece of like opening the different files and being like, what's inside of that? All right, now we can adjust it. So that kind of leads on nicely is say someone's opened up that file and they realize they've got this pattern of self-sabotage, or they've got this pattern of their relationships keep going this like anxious avoidant and then ending, or they've become aware of the pattern, they've become aware of the file, but they want to change it. What's someone's first few steps that they can take to start to adjust things, that once they become aware of the pattern, then to start to shift it and change it?
Yeah, so I want to segue a little bit just before I answer that, because what's also happening on a bigger level is that in our lives, if we have the program, we actually end up attracting more of that. So for example, if we are always attracting emotionally unavailable partners, it's because we maybe have this a program of believing that that's what love is, because maybe that's what we experienced. But what's happening on this kind of level, the universe is actually going to keep on giving us these opportunities through the repetition of the same pattern repeating. So on the one hand, in some ways we're attracting it because it's what's familiar, but on the other hand, we're attracting it because it's what's familiar. But in that, in every time we're attracting it, there's an opportunity. And so that's how we can start to see that everything is a teacher. So when you look at your life and you start to see, okay, why do I keep attracting literally the same partner with a different face? We can learn, okay, there's something here that I need to heal. There's something here that I need to learn. So that's also just how we can start to uncover, how do we know what the other programs I'm carrying? We can start to see, well, where are there things in our life that seem to always turn out the same way? And what's interesting too is that so much of the time we're reinforcing that through our identity. So people will go like, oh, I'm just bad with money, or I'm always been like that, or that's just how I am. And that is, of course, such a limiting belief, because that's a story based on what you've decided is true. But so going back to how do people start to change it? So ultimately, one of the simple tools that I like to share with my clients is when we are trying to transform something. So first of all, what we want to do first is become aware of it. So as we've spoken about, we need to bring the unconscious to the conscious. So it's like cleaning out that cupboard, bringing the unconscious to the conscious. Okay, so there's certain ways that we can do that through that sense of curiosity. Okay, what am I believing to be true? But let's say we come up, as you said, we've looked through the flash disk and we've seen that there's a belief that doesn't serve us. So let's use the example of this belief of I'm bad with money. And maybe that's because, when we grew up, our parents were always kind of either had money and then they didn't, or we saw them getting into debt, or we saw them having just a dysregulated experience with money, or even just through society, there's been something that we've picked up. So it's also important to know that it's not just our parents, it's the world, society, media, school, all these things are shaping us. So let's say we get this idea of realizing that I inherently believe I'm bad with money. And so what ends up happening is that because I inherently believe I'm bad with money, I'm going to keep making bad money decisions. And that was basically my story too. So now that I've brought this into my awareness, I can't just say to myself, oh, I'm abundant and consciously wealthy. I'm consciously wealthy and abundant. And I can say that to myself in the mirror 100 times. But what ends up happening is that the evidence bank that I have of that not being true is far stronger than this new affirmation that I've come up with. So what we need to do is we need to build a bridge between what is and what we want to be. And there's this beautiful little simple sentence that we can use, which is in the process of. So while our subconscious mind, or our mind in general, is not going to believe that we went from I'm bad with money to I'm great with money, we can believe that we are in a process. So we could then come up with a statement that says, for example, I'm in the process of learning to heal my relationship with money. I'm in the process of learning to rewrite my money story. I'm in the process of building conscious, sustainable wealth. And so that's the one piece. But then the way that we actually can create the reprogramming is by taking aligned action. So when we couple this awareness and then, of course, this focusing on what we do want, and then we couple it with action, we're actually creating a new evidence bank. So we can imagine our old evidence bank is pretty compelling. We've got lots of examples that credit card, Ibiza credit card, lots of good examples of why we're bad with money. So what we want to do is we want to start to fill this new evidence bank of I'm good with money. And so if I say to myself, I'm in the process of learning how to be good with money, and then I decide to transfer some of my salary into a savings account, or I put money into my credit card, or I just don't buy that thing, it's actually proving to ourselves that what we're saying is true. And so like anything, like any pattern, repetition is necessary. So we can decide, okay, this is where I am, this is where I want to be. I can build the bridge, which is in the process of, and then I can start to, through daily repetition, prove to myself micro actions, little micro things that we start to make different choices. We start to do things differently. And so it becomes very compelling. The thing is, and I suppose the big caveat is that we actually cannot change from a dysregulated state. So if we're living our life in a survival state, the moment that we are trying to introduce change, it's seen as a threat. So anything, I always like to, really link the survival self and this mechanism in the nervous system with the ego, this concept of the ego. And the ego really isn't a bad thing. What the ego is it's a protector. It's our protective personality. So it's actually trying to keep us safe, just like the nervous system. But for the ego, safe equals same. So it's always going to want to rather keep you in the familiar, even if the familiar isn't serving you or even is quite toxic, at least you know. So the realm of uncertainty is like the scariest thing. It's like the unknown, right? We don't know what's going to happen. And so this is also why we have this tendency to want to control our lives on the physical, because we want to create certainty from the outside in. But ultimately, nervous system work is about how do we start to recognize that there is no certainty. So even people, for example, thought they had this really, really secure job. And then COVID came along and pulled the rug right underneath us. And so that's an example, we can't rely on the outside world to make us feel safe. We have to go internal. Yeah. And so the internal certainty is about regulating the nervous system from that place of just feeling a bit more centered. We start to reframe uncertainty as possibility. And that is, of course, the realm of change and of the life that's going to serve us, the life that's going to light us up. It's not happening in the now, in the comfort zone. It's happening out there.
Yeah. So awesome. Yeah. And for someone who's listening in, they're like, they're understanding these concepts and they're like, yeah, I get it. Like, I've realized that I'm slightly out of alignment in this area. I've realized that there's a pattern which is playing out. And this is like, when I really tune in, this is what I want. But like, when I start to take those steps, it just creates this dysregulation in my system. And I go back to what I already know, which, as we've shared, is common, right? It's what we're built for. We're built for certainty, built to look for safety. How can someone begin to hold themselves through that process so they can take those steps into more of an aligned life without just creating internal chaos?
Yeah, I mean, so I would always say, start with the nervous system, which is basically just learning how to breathe. It's learning how to move your body with intention. And so the process that I guide my clients through, it starts with foundation, aligned foundation. And that is all about habits and ways of being, which are connected to our daily practices as well as the nervous system work. But it isn't going to be necessarily easy. And the thing is, what's interesting about the nervous system as well is that it's not a magic pill. It's an accumulative process. So you can't do some breathing once and then feel like, okay, now I'm going to be calm all the time. And also, it's not about being calm all the time. It's about increasing our capacity to be with life and to manage the space of the uncertainty. And so how can I resource myself? So of course, repetition is important. Self-compassion is important. But if you are someone that is struggling, often we need other people. We need accountability. So maybe that's, joining some kind of a group of people who are doing the work with you. Maybe it's about working with a coach. Maybe it's about, just having an accountability buddy of some kind, because, doing this work alone, like it's not easy. If it's just you in your own mind and it's up to you whether or not you're going to do something, it can be difficult if you are getting in your own way. So starting to recognize, what is it, where do I fall off the wagon? Because if we're just relying on willpower, as we know, willpower is only going to last a certain amount of time. So we want to come at it from the sense of, getting really clear on, like, why am I doing this? Starting to find sustainable changes that you can make. So instead of now you wanting to add in 5 new practices and start a 5 a.m. club morning routine kind of thing, that's probably not going to work. But so the way that I like to share with the nervous system is through 2 different styles of practices. So first of all, you get foundational regulation practices. So these will be things that we can start our day with, that we can build this sense of capacity. And so, some of them are much more kind of somatic in nature, which would be, something like somatic shaking or, specific body holds and, just general nervous system type of somatic exercises. There'll be things like breathwork, but then also whatever makes you feel more like you is probably regulating your nervous system. So maybe that's playing with your dog. Maybe nature is the biggest co-regulator of all. You're going for a walk in nature, those kinds of things, just starting to do more of what makes you feel connected. Because ultimately, as I said in the beginning, when we are in that, what we call the ventral vagal nervous system state, that is the realm of our authentic self. And that is when we feel most like us. And so it's interesting because one of the most common and also the things that I love to hear from my clients is that they'll say after doing some of this work, I feel like myself again. And that is the most beautiful thing because, we don't want to feel, it just shows that we don't want to feel like someone else. We don't want to be that other person. We actually just want to be more of who we really are. And that is really all our work is here. That's what we're here to do and here to discover. And so once we come into that more regulated nervous system, that's when we can start to hear the call of our intuition. We can start to hear the soul's voice coming through because the ego is very loud. It's going to shout much louder. And so if we're in the survival state, there is no transformation that's really possible. So if you're wondering, how to get started, maybe start with the breath, give it a go. It is what I love so much about the breath and why I've really kind of honed in on it is that you're doing it anyway. Anyone can do it and, it's free. You can literally do it anyway. So just learning how to breathe a little bit differently. And so even something as simple as 4, 7, 8 breathing. So inhaling for 4, holding for 7, exhaling through the mouth for 8. You start doing that every day, preferably more than once a day, you'll start to feel shifts. So as I mentioned, I went on a tangent now, the first kind is this foundational practice. So if we imagine starting our day with our cup full, or at least a little further from empty than many of us are. So that will already start to build that sense of resilience. So we face the day and we've got something in our tank. But then the other types of tools are what we call situational practices. So in that moment, when you receive that triggering email from your boss and you feel like so dysregulated that you start looking for jobs or you start eating so you don't feel like it, or you start scrolling so you can start numbing from that feeling. In that moment, can you bring in some breath? Can you bring in some tapping? Can you just get up off of your chair and start walking around the room to just discharge some of that energy? So these pattern interrupters, these situational practices woven into our day, they don't have to take up any time at all. We can do them in those little moments in between. We can do them when the kettle's boiling. We can just do, instead of waiting for the kettle to boil or scrolling on your phone or distracting yourself, can you make that your time that you decide to do a little bit of shaking, or you decide to do a bit of breathing? And so there is no sort of easy way, in terms of, it's not just snap your fingers and you can do it, otherwise everyone would do it. But it is possible, and it's an accumulative effect. The more you start to do it, and if you can build in that accountability for yourself somehow, you will start to feel the results. And then you will start to know, it will be a sense of, even if you go off path and you start to move into a space of anxiety, you know that you can access that again. So it's important to always know that, we think that consistency looks like the same every day. There's this meme I've always seen, that what we think consistency looks like, same every day, but what it really looks like is some days it's 5 minutes, some days it's 20 minutes, and that's okay. It all counts.
Yeah, that's it. And I love what you shared there around like having a coach, a guide, a mentor. Like, I would not be the man I am today, being able to do the things that I'm doing, if it wasn't for the mentors, the coaches who have guided along the way.
Me neither.
Yeah, it's like it really life-changing. Like, you can listen to podcasts and like this one, and it's helpful to get the information, and then the transformation comes through implementation. And yes, you can do that on your own, but having someone to guide you, to hold you through it, it's so important. Like what you were sharing there around having these tools, and I love the foundational like practices, and then also the situational practices that you were sharing there. And yeah, one thing that came up there was a coach once shared with me, and now I have the gift to share this with others. And I think that's the beauty, right? You learn something, embody it, and then you can share it. And it's constant work. But yeah, this situational pattern with like the polyvagal theory with Stephen Porges, it's like you have these different states, right? Where you were talking about the ventral vagal with like this green state where you're like just purely connected, right? Present. And then we have this more activated state and then deactivated state. And like he shared this in like a traffic light system of like green, yellow, red, and literally like physically moving yourself into these different states of like a state of activation, and then moving into a state of deactivation. And what I'm even doing it now, like I'm moving to deactivation, I feel my body, and I'm like, this is the way for anyone who's listening rather than watching. I'm like, my shoulders are forward, my chest is tense in, and almost like I'm crunched over. And like, this is how it's so easy to sit, like when you're on a phone or something, right? And then in a scroll hole, and then like you come out and it's like the thought patterns from that place, they're completely different. And then learning how to move from deactivation into connection, like that skill set in itself has changed so much for me. And I'd say that was like a foundational / also situational. When you feel dysregulated, how can you bring yourself back into connection, right? Yeah.
I find the polyvagal approach to be so helpful, and especially really understanding the vagus nerve, because there's this whole idea of like mind body, but we know now through science, the mind and the body are connected, and actually the mind, the body, and the breath are all connected. And what's interesting is that when you change one, you actually change all three. But the thing is, most people are trying to change the mind. But what they've learned based on the vagus nerve, which is this basically like an information superhighway from the body up into the brain, and all it's communicating all day long is essentially, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And if you are safe, then there's a certain chemical effect in your body, and if there's a threat detected, then there's a different kind of chemical effect in the body. For example, cortisol, adrenaline, all these kinds of hormones. So what's interesting to know is that they've learned that 80% of the messages between the body and the brain are going from the body to the brain, and only 20% are going from the brain to the body, which is why we can't outthink stress. We can't start to just think ourselves to sleep. If anyone's ever tried to do that, it doesn't work very well. But so that's why when we use so the vagus nerve moves directly through the lungs as well. So when we breathe differently, we're actually signaling to our body we are safe.
Mm.
Because when we are in a stressed state, our breath changes. So we start to breathe shallowly and rapidly, and sometimes hold the breath. So the breath is responding to the state, and our state is responding to our breath, right? So when we can notice, whoa, I'm triggered, and then we can notice that our breath is, most of the time, a lot of people will be holding it. But because we can change the breath, we can go, okay, whoa, I'm in a dysregulated state, but let me just start to bring the breath deep into the belly, put my hands on my belly, or one hand on my belly, one hand on my heart, and just start to breathe intentionally into the belly and the chest. And suddenly, the body starts to believe that we're okay. And so what ends up happening is that then the thoughts start to shift. So it's that sense of, when we're in that fight flight state, the thoughts are just so, intensive, and they can be really, really anxious thoughts or just overthinking. We get caught up in that sort of spiral. But when we bring safety to the body, suddenly it's almost like the clouds start to part, and we can find that wisdom, we can find that clarity, and we're like, okay, I actually know what to do.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'd be curious, but I've done this before, but just to do like a very short experience for someone listening. Obviously, if you're driving, then this probably wouldn't be smart, but just doing that, like that, a hand on the belly and a hand on the heart, and just like if you want to guide, just like a 30-second
Yeah.
breath.
Yeah.
Would you be open to do that?
100%.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay.
That would be great. Just for the listener, I think that would be, and also just what a gift to give right now. That'd be amazing. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, let's practice a little bit of 4-7-8 breathing, because it's such a beautiful one to do, and it's actually been quite well researched. So wherever you are, you can find a comfortable seat, or you could do this lying down. And maybe you'd like to close down the eyes if you feel comfortable to do so, and of course, if you're not driving. I'm just beginning to feel your body supported and held by the chair beneath you, whatever surface that you're resting upon, and really beginning to feel the weight of the body. So shifting awareness from the thoughts of the mind and beginning to connect with the felt sensation of your body held as you are. And then from here, let's just roll the shoulders. So bringing the shoulders up to the ears and releasing them back and down. And let's begin by taking 3 deep breaths. A nice full deep breath in through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Inhaling deeply through the nose. Imagine breathing in a sense of calm. And exhale, releasing through the mouth, letting go of overwhelm, anything heavy you're carrying. And one more deep, expansive breath in. Holding for a little moment at the top. And as you hold the breath, can you soften the shoulders for 3, 2, and 1. Exhale, letting that go. And from here, beginning to connect with your natural flow of breath. Bringing one hand onto the chest, one hand onto the belly. And as you breathe, beginning to feel into this natural rise and fall of the body beneath the palms of the hands. Feeling into the sense of self-touch. Noticing what it's like to hold yourself here. The comfort of your own embrace. And if you're clenching the jaw or furrowing the brow, just beginning to soften the face, softening the shoulders, really relaxing the belly. And we'll take a few rounds now of 4-7-8 breathing. So we'll breathe in for a count of 4. We'll hold the breath at the top for a count of 7. And you'll breathe out through the mouth like you're blowing out a candle for a count of 8. So let's begin breathing in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale through the mouth. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Last round. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And returning to your natural breath. Maybe noticing any shifts in how you feel and how you're breathing. And when you're ready, you can lower the hands down to the legs. You can rub the thighs, roll the shoulders, and blinking, open the eyes.
So good. Thank you.
It's such a pleasure.
Yeah. What a gift.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's always amazing to me. I'm fortunate enough to be able to guide different breathwork workshops and things for corporates. And it sort of surprises me, but by now it doesn't, that I'll walk into a room full of people and they're, all different levels, from the C-suite all the way to the people who are cleaning the toilets. And they'll all be together in the same room in these beautiful wellness workshops that are happening more and more. And, a lot of people are a bit skeptical because they're there because they have to be there. And I'll say, has anyone here, does anyone here think about their breath? And so few people have really ever thought about the fact that they're breathing. And so you can imagine they kind of come in here, who's this woman trying to teach us how to breathe? But what's always amazing is that, I'll guide them through a few of these processes and without fail, there'll be a shift. And just to know that that is possible can really open up so much for someone that otherwise has no tools or understanding of how to deal with the stresses of their lives. And, being in South Africa, there's a lot going on. And so just being able to realize that I have the power to shift my state is a game changer. And I really believe that in that way, our breath can change the world. If you imagine from the highest level of being a CEO, if you start to regulate your nervous system, the trickle-down effect of how you interact with people, how you run your business, how you, give back to the world is going to change. And the same with someone at the bottom, instead of feeling powerless, you start to feel inspired, empowered, like things are possible. And what I've seen through this work, working with many, many people, is that, when we start to show up for ourselves in that way, when we start to choose differently, and even if it's just choosing to breathe differently, the universe kind of shows up with all these different unexpected gifts and opportunities, and the path begins to reveal itself. And so we stop living from this place of aligning with our limiting beliefs, and we start to align with our higher self and our authentic self and the path that's actually meant for us, which is essentially the pathway to our greatest fulfillment in life.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And whenever I do practices like that, and that was beautifully led, so yeah, thank you. Like this, just to take that moment throughout a day, which can be so busy with work and this commitment, that commitment, and you got to do dishes and wash up, and then you got to go out and hit the gym, and then there's these so many stresses, right? And especially in our Western society, it seems like there's just this addiction to more. It's like, even through, if I look at exercise as an example, it's like suddenly it's like there's high rocks, and then there's CrossFit, and then there's yoga, and then there's Pilates, and then there's gym, and then there's this, like, there's more and more and more and more, and then there's can be these stresses. Like, actually practices like this just be like, sometimes it's actually less. Like, sometimes it's slowing down that then brings this greater levels of awareness of what should I be focusing on, not like what are people telling me to focus on, but actually what does my heart say to focus on right now? And the practices like what you led there, like that may seem so just like simple because it's breath, yet it's so forgotten. Yeah,
Exactly.
and so powerful, so profound, and we're with ourselves all day, every day. As the one person, if we can hold ourselves and use a tool like the breath, like you said, we're breathing all of the time. Yeah, we just don't realize them. How empowering that at any moment of the day, someone can just tune into their breath and change their state.
Yeah.
Incredibly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the relationship that we have with ourselves is the most important relationship of all. And, there is that sense of learning how to accept ourselves and see ourselves without attaching to our identity in such a big way. It's a powerful thing. And the breath is a beautiful path in. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So at this part of the show, we'll go into the vault section, where we have some mystery messages in there, and then also each guest leaves a message, which you have the opportunity to do after, and then that message may be picked in the next episode or a few episodes time. And it's an opportunity too for the listeners and us to reflect on whatever comes up. And it's amazing how it so often links in with whatever's been shared in the episode. And it's kind of a great way to integrate, to sum up, and then we can go from there. So there's a few messages in here.
All right. People will give us people and circumstances to show us where we are not free. Where are you not free currently? I think it's a little bit like what I was saying earlier around, he said people will give us people, but I think it's almost like the universe will give us people and circumstances that will show us where we are not free. So it will start to reveal our patterns to us. Everything is a mirror and everything is a teacher. And so when there's a circumstance that's starting to trigger something within us, we can actually use that trigger as our teacher, of course. And so it's starting to see around, where are you not free currently? Where are you living from this place of shoulds? What I find so fascinating is that we've been made to believe that there's this one cookie cutter design to life. This first you must, do well at school, then you must go to university, then you must meet the person, then you must get married, have children, buy the house. These are the things that you must do to be happy. But so many people follow the path exactly as they're supposed to, and they end up and they don't understand why they're so miserable. And so that's a sense of, freedom is being able to do what you think and think what you do. Sort of that alignment of feeling, thinking, and doing is all in alignment. There's not that sense of what I really want is this, but what I'm going to do is this. Because that's really, to me, what not being free is, right? It's like you're not free to just express yourself as your true self. And the thing is, it's not about being selfish either. It's about recognizing that when we are all shining our light as best we can, or as truly authentically as we can, the world is a better place. And the reconfiguration that might happen in that, it's always for the highest good, as long as we're leading from our soul self, not from our ego self. And so, of course, that's, to me, the ego is about restricting that freedom, whereas living in the realm of possibilities is following the call of our soul or our authentic self. So that's kind of how I interpret it.
Yeah, that's me. I love where you shared there about the freedom piece and linking that every trigger that arises is an opportunity to then see that this is an area where I can then integrate and become more free. And I also love where you shared too about the alignment piece there, where even if you've got money, time, freedom, all these things, yet you're unable to express your authentic self. Like, are you really free? Like, are you really living a life of freedom? So yeah, I love that. And what came up for me with that question is really just tuning into where in life are you currently living that, and are you currently living and that that's not your true authentic self. I think just like really tuning into that and having that inner almost like exploration of like, where is that question really landing? And on the other side of that, like how can you then use these practices like the breath work and like moving in and creating this regulations inside the system to like step by step. Like no need to like just do it all at once, but just like step by step, start to build a life more in alignment, and then taking the step and holding yourself through it, and taking the step and holding yourself through it. And yeah, that's why like I love doing things like this podcast, because each step, each episode is like literally that. It's like taking the step. It's like, like what can I learn? Or like, how can I hold myself even more? Like, how can we create even more alignment in this space to like bring the best out of the conversations and yeah, all of that. So yeah, I love that. That's what came up for me there.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said around.
Yeah.
I love what you said around step by step, because so often, we are here and we want to be there, but it can often be too much too soon. And then what ends up happening is that we go all in on something, but our nervous system doesn't feel safe in that. And so we end up self-sabotaging. So that sense of, it's what we call titration of the nervous system, little bit. So we start to expand our capacity a little more, and then we come back to safety. We expand a little more, we come back to safety. We expand a little more, so there's this thing, and we were talking about it before we were recording, this idea of if you got everything you want tomorrow, like, would you actually be able to hold it? Would you have the capacity for it? If you went from wherever you are now to being a billionaire, like, what would that look like? Would you actually, would you be able to stay connected to your center and make decisions that would be right? Or would you be overwhelmed by it? So there is this beauty in the journey and in the path. And we're in such a rush to get there. But I mean, when it comes to this idea of, the word healing is a little bit overused, but that essentially what I love about the word healing is it means to make whole. And so this path of wholeness, I want to say, is it's a never-ending journey, but it's also not about getting there, but it's also not about continuously seeking either. It's a sort of sense of realizing that everything that you need is actually already within you. And so how do you start to access more of that truth and dance with life, start to see things that come up as challenges as teachers, and start to use your what I love is a phrase that really resonates with me, is that our wounds are wisdom. And so I'm so grateful for some of the things that I've been through in my life, because moving through that and really learning how to find this healing that I have, it's allowed me to be so much better at what I'm doing and more helpful to other people, because I can really resonate at a deep level. And so the things that I've navigated now are things that I can share with others. And I'm so grateful for that. But of course, at the time, I was not grateful for any of them yet. So it's this beautiful understanding that if we just keep on moving forward with our hearts open and with a sense of curiosity and coming back to the body, coming back to the breath, that then we will ultimately be led to where we need to go.
Yeah, so awesome. So people listening for just kind of like sum up the episode, what would be a logical next step that people can take on this journey of creating more alignment, regulation? Yeah.
So I actually have a course that I've created on this work because I'm so passionate about it. So the idea was, there's a lot of nervous system regulation stuff out there now, which is fantastic. But sometimes it's in multiple places. And so I decided to create a little bit of a library of nervous system regulation tools and a mini course called Regulate to Reconnect, which is all about regulation of the nervous system to reconnect with your authentic self. And I'm actually giving it away for free to your listeners. It's
Amazing.
There's 3 different sections in it. So first of all, there's the introduction, but the 3 different sections are around the 3 B's of regulation. So that's the body, the breath, and the being. And so the body is all about, of course, somatic physical practices, ones you can do on the go, ones you can do more foundationally, same with the breath. And then the being is really about things in our life that regulate us too, these lifestyle shifts that we can start to make too. So the course is, it's definitely user-friendly. The videos are all quite short and digestible, but the idea is to empower you to start to integrate not necessarily all, but at least some of these different tools and practices into your everyday so that you can start to live from a more regulated space. So you can grab that on my website. And yeah, of course.
It's so awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that as well with the listeners. And what we'll do is we'll put it in the show notes as well. So literally just anywhere on this, like just below this episode, that will pop a link there to make it nice and easy. And like these practices are life changing. So, you know, to learn and go through this, and the fact you're giving it away for free here is really appreciative. So yeah, that's awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. It's been so great to chat, and yeah.
Awesome. Let's keep changing the world. One person, one more regulated person at a time.
One breath at a time.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sam.